welcome everybody. Welcome to the third event of Discover Islam Week. We hope that we've shed some light on some of the relevant topics in Islam that you might find a bit difficult to understand. Our speaker today is our Sr Zara Faris. She's a graduate in Arabic and Islamic Studies from SOAS. She's also lived in Egypt for a year, and she's currently a researcher and a speaker for the Muslim Debate Initiative. So we hand over to Sr Zara. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Peace be with you all. Thank you to the ISOC for inviting me here today to speak with you about the concept of the hijab in Islam. To begin, why do we need to have talks specifically relating to women in Islam, but rarely about men in Islam? Some, for example feminists, might argue that it's because Islam is yet more evidence that women live in a man's world, that men see themselves as the main addressees of Islam, whilst women are perpetually treated as a subordinated other, only discussed as another subject in relation to men. In other words, critics of Islam think that we talk about women as if they're not recipients of Islam, but spectators bound within it. This is entirely untrue. Islam, if it was just another so-called male-dominated paradigm, or even barbaric towards women, why has Britain seen a wave of conversions, a 50% rise since 2001, predominantly led by young women around the age of 27, often career women and most of them university educated? This is despite the stereotype that is perpetuated by the media of the Muslim woman being oppressed, secluded, meek, isolated, imprisoned, silenced and violently subjugated by men. The trend of turning to Islam, despite the negative propaganda, is not just with new Muslims, but with also young Muslim women born and raised in the UK that have chosen to return to the way of life that Islam prescribes. So what is it that has caused these young women, who seem to have it all, to make drastic changes to their lives in how they choose to dress, what they eat, how they present themselves, who they socialise with and how they think? They appear to be exchanging the freedoms of liberalism for the restrictions of a male-dominated, patriarchal religion. Or are they? This is a question that warrants the discussion into the reality of the different topics relating to women in Islam. When we talk about women in Islam, it's not in comparison to the men in Islam, but in comparison to women in other systems. And as I will discuss, the reality is that Islam primarily addresses men and women in exactly the same way, because men and women, by and large, share the same human characteristics. Where men and women differ, Islam addresses them separately. The status that Islam mandates for women makes it worthy of special study and attention as a serious alternative to movements like feminism. And you'll hear me using the feminism from time to time, the term feminism during this lecture, because feminists posit often misleading and highly contradictory ideas about what women should be doing. But when the Islamic method is comprehensively understood, we see that women have no need for the confusing and misguided language and sentiments of feminism to understand their role and guarantee their rights and protection in society. Now, the subject of hijab in Islam relates to more than just a headscarf. Trying to assess the merits of one item of clothing without understanding the wider social system that it is part of is like reading one paragraph in the middle of a novel and thinking that should tell you what the rest of the book is about. The social system in Islam that organises the interaction and relationships between men and women is a set of interlinked rules. They need to be considered wholly and not in a piecemeal way, as each aspect of it cannot be fully realised without the rest. We have to look at the dynamics of social life a little more broadly before we can understand the solution that Islam proposes for the problems that we face today in society, and before we can understand the merits of the hijab. Now, in ancient Greece, seduction was a more serious crime than rape because it involved the capture of someone's attention and affection and loyalty away from the one to whom they properly belonged. In other words, whilst rape was the violent assault on the body, seduction was the more heinous assault on the mind. Present-day liberal societies do agree that rape is a wrongful subjection of a person's body against their will. Seduction, on the other hand, is considered the mere manipulation of another person's desire and is positively encouraged as a sign of individual freedom. To prohibit this public exchange of sexual signals would be considered a constraint on natural liberty, a constraint on freedom of expression. This freedom of expression comes from and is essential to most liberal democracies. This type of system institutionalizes legislative authority in the people directly, so in other words, laws and values are no longer sourced from an unquestionable higher authority such as God. Rather, they become the product of the masses. Everything is submitted for human scrutiny, and laws are determined in this way. So freedom of expression is indispensable, according to them, not only as a tool, but also as a symbol of freedom from religious values. This freedom of expression is based upon two myths. The first is that a person may act and speak as he likes, as long as no harm or offence is occurred to another, and that this freedom is a sign of progress and development. In other words, the goal of expression is expression itself. This freedom of expression also feeds the consumerism which drives the objectification of women today. And in the 19th century, France, Britain, Germany, and America worked very hard to transform people's buying habits so that people would begin to view luxuries as necessities. So, for example, they evolved the form of department stores so that goods were put on display as opposed to in boxes, so that people could imagine and experience how those items would look in their own homes. One writer, Richard Robbins, explained how they also cultivated the idea of fashion, which would help in the stirring up of anxieties, I quote his words there, and restlessness over the possession of things that were not new or up to date. Fashion pressured people to buy not out of need, but for style, from a desire to conform to what others defined as fashionable. And this was all to drive up consumerism. This conformity has always been essential to capitalism. Yet fashions or trends are often only encouraged where there is money to be made. So, for example, going much further back in the 1590s, Indian, Persian and Chinese silk was very much in high demand in Europe. People wanted to wear this, so much so that the European governments passed legislation to try and stop them from wearing it, because these imported silks threatened their own economy. So they banned all Asian silks from England, and in France they put a 500 livre prize for stripping any woman wearing Indian fabrics until they were naked in the streets, or to dress prostitutes in Indian silks and then undress them as examples. And this was all just to protect their own textile industries from competition. A BBC documentary called The Century of the Self also explored how psychological research was used by corporate America after the Second World War to understand and categorize people into predictable behaviors. And this was so that they could get people to express their individuality by buying things, not things that they needed, but things that they were made to think that they needed so that they could express themselves. The reality is you can't buy individuality, and this is no more than subservience to corporate giants. Today, the global fashion industry tells women that it is an expression of individuality to wear skinny jeans this season, and it mass produces skinny jeans for thousands of women to want, buy and wear, and being seen in anything else this season equals social suicide. And women are forced to be saleswomen for this consumerism. There is an American reality TV show called America's Next Top Model that makes aspiring models compete against each other for a modeling contract. And every week you see those girls in tears on the show because they feel like they're not good enough, they're not as pretty as the other girls. They're told, you have to sell the product, you have to make me want that dress, you have to be willing to do the nude shoot, you have to learn to like the style that we give you. You have to make every man want you, and you have to make every woman want to look like you. And that really is reality TV, because these really are the values that girls are being forced to live by. And it's not just limited to aspiring models. In a study commissioned by Dove, PhD doctors from Harvard and LSE carried out research with normal, everyday women to understand the relationship between women, beauty and well-being. The study showed that almost 2/3 of women thought that society expects women to enhance their physical attractiveness, and that women who are more beautiful have greater opportunities in life. And more than half of women thought that physically attractive women are more valued by men. In essence, it found that women see beauty and physical attractiveness as increasingly socially mandated and rewarded. And this is a complex which deeply affects most people in society, and it's no surprise, given that magazines like Cosmopolitan publish lists of so-called assets that women should apparently maximise in order that she can have her pick of men. And it lists the following, for example, as what men notice about women: the thickness of her hair, having a fun and relaxed smile, the pitch of her voice, her hip-to-waist ratio, her eyes, her glowiness, how many people she's with, apparently if she's with too many, you won't approach her, and last but not least, any fake attachments such as fake nails and eyelashes. Not only this, but the Dove research found that 6 out of 10 girls stop doing things they love because they feel bad about how they look. They avoid going to the doctor, giving their opinion in class, even going to school. It's no wonder that we've seen such a rise in plastic surgery despite the recession, from nose jobs to facelifts to tummy tucks, and now even female genital cosmetic surgery. And it's all in the pursuit of this unattainable ideal. I want to contextualize this for the men as best as I can, if there is an equivalent. So I'm going to paraphrase an example which is used by a really brilliant writer. His name is Dr. Warren Farrell. He's an American doctor in particular gender studies. And so for the men, I'm going to ask you to imagine that you're good at fixing cars. You probably are, but just imagine that you're really good at fixing cars, and it seems to come quite naturally. And growing up, you've always been complimented on your mechanical abilities, in the same way that women are often complimented on their looks. And one day, suddenly, a social worker is responsible for evaluating you as a father. And if she doesn't take you seriously, you could lose your child. Now imagine you're changing your baby's nappy and the social worker tells you the traces of grease under your nails are really attractive. So she's clearly not focusing on your parenting skills. Would you feel like you were being told a man's place is under a car? How would you feel about a comment that in other circumstances might be a compliment, but in these circumstances, not acknowledging or validating the comment or reinforcing it somehow could mean you lose your child? And this is the kind of experience or observation that causes women to see their beauty and physical attractiveness as increasingly socially mandated and rewarded in society today. And it's not just the highly lucrative global fashion industry, which is worth about $900 billion, that has benefited from caging women into this complex, but women's bodies are used to sell everything from cars to broadband internet to toilet bleach. And the woman's being used as the consumer, the saleswoman, and the end product. This modern phenomenon was also well observed in the book Fight Club, or also in the movie, if that's the version you've seen, with the famous lines, you buy furniture, you tell yourself, this is the last sofa I'll ever need in my life. But the sofa, you buy it, then for a couple of years you're satisfied that no matter what goes wrong, at least you've got your sofa issue handled. Then the right set of dishes, then the perfect bed, the drapes, the rug, then you're trapped in your lovely nest, and the things you used to own, now they own you. Similarly, for a woman, it might go like this. You buy a very expensive pair of black stilettos. You tell yourself, this is the last pair of dressing up stilettos I'll ever need in my life, because that's how expensive they were. You buy the heels, and for a couple of weeks you're satisfied. No matter what goes wrong, at least you got the shoe issue handled. Then the right dress, the fake tan, then the perfect bag, the hair colour, the makeup, the body, and then you're trapped in your lovely nest, and all the things you used to own, now they own you. Malcolm X once made a very interesting observation about women in society. He wrote, any country's moral strength or its moral weakness is quickly measurable by the street attire and attitude of its women, especially its young women. Wherever the spiritual values have been submerged, if not destroyed, by an emphasis upon the material things, invariably the women reflect it. Here we have not only the exploitation of women's bodies, but also men's desires, leading to the degradation, disrespect, and demoralization of women. The spectre of the perfect-looking woman haunts not only women, but men too. Men are continuously being bombarded with images of perfectly looking women. How would they value a woman for her personality or her mind when society has forced women to hide these characteristics in the pursuit of this unattainable ideal? So what we have is false incentives. Both men and women are being encouraged to value one another solely in materialistic terms. One writer, Naomi Wolf, explained in her book that the beauty myth is like the original Iron Maiden. This was a medieval German instrument of torture, a body-shaped casket painted with the limbs and features of a beautiful smiling woman. The victim that was tortured was slowly closed inside her and the lid shut to immobilize the victim, who either died from starvation or being impaled by the spikes embedded into them. Now, feminist movements have no solution for the sexual objectification of women. Some feminists seek to androgynize the female appearance, while others campaign for safer cosmetic surgery without really challenging why women feel compelled to get it in the first place. And empowering women with careers is apparently not helping either. Women in the workplace are under perpetual pressure to exhibit daily, pristine, sartorial glamour, on top of being a competent employee. Another Cosmopolitan article entitled How to Make an Impact on a Man even told women how to get attention from men at work and to get them to unconsciously respond. So the article mostly suggested things like purposefully dropping things and then bending down to pick them up and leaning on him at any point if possible. Not only is this degrading, but other articles explain how to file a sexual harassment lawsuit just in case she elicited a response from the wrong man. Now, some feminists even capitalise on the objectification of women, arguing that there's nothing wrong with women leveraging their sexual powers, either to express their individuality or to get something in life. But there is nothing individual about showing one's sexual attributes, because these are the same attributes that literally half the population also has. There is nothing individual about this. It's like me showing my 2 eyes or my 2 cheeks and saying I'm expressing my individuality. Well, I'm not, because everybody has 2 eyes and 2 cheeks or whatever. When in the animal kingdom, creatures display their sexual attributes, like male birds that display their finery to attract the plainer-looking female, or the flower which blossoms with stunning colours and scents in order to attract the bee for pollination, they do this to show the intent to mate or procreate. When a human being continuously expresses this in public, that person confirms that their sexual attributes is what they are, what they want to be seen as. They are perpetuating the objectification of women. As for using one's appearance to get something in life, they may be rudely disturbed when they realise that superficial beauty comes with an expiry date. Every person ages eventually, and if you are with a certain man or have a certain job just because of how you look, the chances are they won't value you for much else when that beauty fades, or suddenly getting a female boss might mean you don't have the same leverage at your job either. It's analogous to a rich kid that's born and raised with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he tries to use that wealth to draw attention to his business acumen, to get professional respect, or to attract a spouse. But they don't actually have any business acumen because they've always relied on their wealth. Similarly, relying on your appearance to open doors for you means you're not actually getting the due appreciation that you should get for your acquired qualities. A man can rarely get by on just his looks. He has to be actively doing something, achieving, putting his life on the line, or his well-being in danger. If we look at the dynamics of society at the most basic level, we find that biologically every woman counts in the reproduction and perpetuating of life itself. This gives each woman an intrinsic worth, regardless of what she does. On the other hand, it only takes one man for many women to have children. This gives rise to the idea that men are largely disposable, whilst every woman is indispensable. This is why instinctively we prioritise the safety and comfort for women rather than men, why women are rescued first in any emergency or disaster, why men tend to work longer hours risking life and limb in the more dirty and dangerous jobs. One writer describes this dynamic as women are human beings whilst men are human doings. Take the traditional French fairy tale of the Beauty and the Beast, not the Disney version, the original version, in which the woman's beauty is used to attract a male that will prevent her family from starving. And whilst he might be a beast to the rest of the world, he could be like a prince if he was willing to give the fruits of his labour to the beautiful woman's family, with no guarantee that the beautiful woman would marry him or that they would even get along, or that she would even still be beautiful when the process was complete. In the modern day, we find the same risk and guarantee paradigm. The man buys the woman dinner, flowers, movie tickets, and she gets to keep the engagement ring, even if they don't get married. So both historically and currently, the man is the one that takes the risks, whilst the woman is the one that doesn't have to do much, but asks for security and guarantees. Whilst in the secular world, a woman is told that she's free to define for herself all aspects of her life, from her appearance, her dress code, her relationships with men, to the roles that she adopts in marriage and society. She's free to define her own expectations with regards to all of these matters without any coercion, instruction, or guidance. She's an autonomous individual at liberty to do as she likes. In Islam, men and women are taught that first and foremost, they are accountable and responsible for every action they perform in life. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, "People are as equal as the teeth of a comb," he concluded the sentence by saying, "They are differentiated only by virtue." And when it comes to valuing virtue or piety or good conduct, Islam first and foremost establishes parity between the deeds of men and women, where men and women are the same. So God says in the Quran, "I will deny no man or woman among you the reward of their labour." And "We have created you from a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes that you may know one another. Verily, the most honourable of you is the most righteous of you." So in Islam, men and women do not differ from one another in terms of their humanity. They are valued at par according to the same criteria, and the best of them is neither male nor female, but the one who is best in virtue. It is the way that men choose to conduct themselves in the situations arising from their natural circumstances that determines their value. So in Islam, women do not seek self-worth from men, and men do not seek self-worth from women. Our roles are not designed so that we can seek self-worth from one another. Rather, we seek this from God. The overriding purpose of both men and women in Islam is to pursue this virtue. And there's a wise man's tale which says that heaven and hell are identical. People are sat around a table facing each other with bowls of delicious food, but their elbows don't bend. In hell, people are always hungry, but in heaven, people are happy and content. Why? It's because in heaven, people feed each other, whereas in hell, they're so selfish, they only want to feed themselves. And Islam observes that men and women largely are the same. They're both designed to experience life and to live in the same society. The survival of the human race depends on appropriate interaction between men and women, and both men and women have the essential requirements of life. Each of them has a vital energy, and they both have needs such as hunger, thirst, and sleep. They also both have a survival instinct and a procreation instinct. They both have the faculty of thought and intellect. Islam also recognizes that men and women differ from one another in a few fundamental ways. For example, the role of testosterone in building muscle, in increasing competitiveness, confidence, and risk-taking, making men better suited to the more hazardous and competitive roles of society. A basic understanding of anatomy also shows that women are physically equipped for reproduction and motherhood. Thus, in Islam, the family is the foundation of society. Islam recognizes that an individual is born into a family as a dependent. He neither creates himself, nor names himself, nor weans himself, nor raises himself. However, it also observes that whilst an individual might be a product of the society he lives in, he also has the ability to reform the society he lives in. Thus, in Islam, marriage is the bedrock of family life and the fundamental unit of society. It prescribes synergy between men and women and gives us rights and duties to one another. This is to create a comfortable environment in which family members can achieve their potential. So Islam encourages a general distinction in roles where the man's field of activity pertains to his strengths, so he's obliged to be the protector and provider for women. And the women's domain is to nurture the future of mankind. And when they work together, each deploying his or her special functions in the most socially useful manner, it makes a whole. Thus we find in the Quran the verse which states, "Men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah has given one more strength than the other and because they support them from their means." And this verse acknowledges the natural difference between the genders and that the physically stronger individual is given a greater responsibility concerning physical maintenance and protection. Islam also recognizes that whilst men tend to have more physical power, women tend to have more aesthetic power. A man can overpower a woman with his physical strength, but a woman can overpower a man with her beauty. So Islam seeks to synergize these different qualities of men and women so that they are honored in the right way, and any abuse of these powers is minimized so that people can go about their lives without fear of being distracted or judged. So the Quran states, the believers, men and women, are protectors of one another. So for a Muslim woman, she is not the arbiter in how she defines her beauty, her image, or how she values herself, rather God is. And for the Muslim man, his desires are not to be the standard used to decide how he treats or views a woman, rather God is the standard to be used. Islam does not have a prescribed idea of what constitutes beauty either, and it doesn't have a defined prototype or a specific image that women have to strive to achieve. So Islam doesn't require any women to barbarically mutilate themselves in order to be acceptable, so we're not subject to any of these unrealistic standards. Islam does, however, discuss the concept of the image that a Muslim woman should adopt in different circumstances and to whom she can reveal her beauty. So it's not a myth that men and women are attracted to each other. Islam very honestly recognizes this aspect of human nature and organizes the social system around this reality. So now we enter a new semantic field of concepts specific to the Islamic social system. So we have words like awra, which basically means the vulnerable parts that a man and a woman both have to cover on themselves, and the word mahram, which means the category of men who are precluded from marriage for a woman. So for example, her fathers, brothers, sons, or obviously her own husband. The word hijab in Arabic comes from the root which means to cover, to veil, to make imperceptible, to shelter, or to screen, or form a separation. When Muslims refer to the hijab, they're commonly referring to the headscarf. There are other words to describe the headscarves as well, such as shaira or khimar, or in Urdu, Hindi, or Persian, you call it the chadar or something else. And the niqab refers to the face veil. The jilbab is often used to describe the loose-fitting dress, and this doesn't just mean the one Arabic style of dress, any loose-fitting dress. Thus we find in the Quran the verse which stipulates and says to the believing women that they should lower their gaze and guard their modesty, that they should not display their beauty and ornaments except what must ordinarily appear thereof, and they should draw their veils over the chests and not display their beauty except to their husbands, and the list goes on, fathers, brothers, whatever. It also says, O Prophet, tell your wives and daughters and the believing women that they should draw their veils over their bodies. That is most convenient, that they should be recognized and not harassed. In specifying this further, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ explained that once a woman has reached physical maturity, nothing should be seen of her except her face and hands. And men's clothes should also not be skin tight or fitted, and they must be covered from at least the navel to the knee. So both men and women have this concept of awra, these parts that should be covered. It's not just referring to women, but men too. And the Islamic dress is worn when Muslims are around members of the opposite gender who are not precluded from marriage for them. So, like I said, in other words, a woman doesn't need to cover to such an extent in front of her father, brother, son, etc. Now, Islam is often accused of being a male-dominated religion because it covers its women up. But in a real male-dominated society, wouldn't men rather have women scantily clad for their own selfish pleasures? Would it be really cunning? Would be if men could manipulate women to voluntarily wear less and subject themselves to all sorts of surgical procedures to enhance their beauty and actually make the women think that this is what they want to do. The reality of Islam is quite the opposite. And women wear the hijab first and foremost for God, not for any person. And this expression of modesty creates a protection that forces men to value her, not for her beauty, but for her mind and her qualities. And this is one way that Islam liberates women from the superficial expectations of men and from the expectations of other women too. It also puts women on a level playing field, so women feel far less insecure or threatened by other women's looks, and lets our characters and virtues be the qualities that shine. The Islamic dress liberates both women and men, and it enables men and women to better participate in public life, together, without any sexual tension, without distraction, without temptation. The hijab also saves a huge amount of time every morning. It takes about a minute to put on, whereas some women end up spending hours making sure their hair looks perfect every morning before they leave the house. Unlike the 6 out of 10 girls that are afraid to leave their homes for fear of how they look, the Islamic dress liberates us and facilitates our role in public life. So we can see that the only time that Muslim women are oppressed by the hijab is when these items of clothing are banned by governments, causing Muslim women to be confined to their homes, literally house arrest, cutting them off from their work, education, picking their kids up from school, medical care, all because they refuse to perpetuate this Western beauty complex. Now, because the title said hijab to be or not to be, I found this quote in Hamlet, so I'm going to use it. So Shakespeare's Hamlet said, "'Tis too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious action we do sugarcoat over the devil himself." So Islam also recognizes that the outward act alone is not quite enough. You must also have as well as the outward act, men and women must also cultivate a sincere state of mind to supplement this. As a starter, in addition to the dress code, both men and women also have to lower their gaze. So the verse I mentioned earlier said, "Tell the believing men that they must lower their gazes and guard their private parts. It is more decent for them. And tell the believing women that they must lower their gazes and guard their private parts." And that's in chapter 4, verse 30, if anyone wants to look it up. Although sometimes these days, walking in the streets, and we're told to lower our gaze, but I heard from some brothers that it's better to lift your gaze and just look at the sky, because otherwise if you look down, you won't be able to avoid what you're trying to avoid. You actually see more of it. But anyway, so with regards to lowering the gaze, the Quran says, don't even say "uff" to your parents in frustration. This is a stipulation in the Quran for children to respect their parents. Don't even, in exasperation or frustration, even sigh in anger at them. Which means you certainly can't shout at them, you certainly can't hit them. And similarly in the Quran, when men are told to lower their gazes from women, this means that they can't definitely can't ogle at them and they can't abuse them in any other way. It's the same for women. Women can't stare at men in that way as well. So, and some of us might have heard a variation of different and somewhat questionable analogies used to explain the concept of hijab and modesty. For example, the idea that nobody wants to eat the unwrapped sweet that has passed around the hands of everyone in the audience, or that a woman that covers is like a car with a cover, only uncovered when the driver is going for a drive. And such analogies, I think, not only quite literally perpetuate the objectification of women, we're not cakes or cars, but also makes people think that you have to be as innocent or pure as a newborn in order to practice modesty or chastity. Islam recognizes that we're not free from weaknesses and nobody is perfect, and covering up doesn't make you instantly pure or innocent. It is a step towards this. And we are told that God is most forgiving and he blots out sins again and again. He wipes out any sins that he wants to, as long as you're sincerely striving to get it right. So modest behavior must complement the modest appearance. You don't have to be perfect to be striving for this, you just have to be striving for it. On a spiritual level, some describe the woman as being where the beauty of God's creation tends to be concentrated. And the veiling of her is like the veiling of the artistry of God. And perhaps the best form of veil, the best protection, the best screen, the best appreciation of aesthetic beauty, and the best comfort that men and women have in this world is one another in a loving and committed relationship. Thus we find in the Quran, they, i.e. your wives, are your garment and you are a garment for them. I mentioned at the start of my talk that the subject of hijab in Islam relates to more than just the headscarf. And the social system in Islam that organizes the interaction and relationship which results from men and women meeting is a set of interlinked rules, and the hijab is just one component of that. There are different safeguards that Islam implements to facilitate a positive environment in which both men and women can achieve their potential in society with minimum fear or distraction, and as a result safeguard the family unit from breakup or corruption. So aside from covering and lowering one's gaze, both men and women are encouraged to marry at an early age to protect them from transgressing the social system. Both men and women are commanded to exercise chastity and self-control for those whose specific circumstances won't allow them to get married. The defamation of chaste women is prohibited. For example, someone who falsely accuses a woman of fornication is severely punished and their testimony is no longer acceptable in law. Jobs which endanger morals and cause corruption in society are prohibited. For example, a woman cannot do jobs which exploit her femininity, such as selling products in a state of softness and seductiveness, or with a tempting voice, enticing the buyer into the trade. In Islam, jobs should be accomplished on merit, and not because of anything else, and least of all because of gender. And lastly, a man and a woman are not allowed to be in seclusion with one another unless they are their mahram, the concept which I described earlier, i.e. unmarriageable or already married to them. And both men and women are reminded to be conscious of God. See, we don't need Big Brother because Muslims are taught that first and foremost God is omniscient and he's watching wherever we are. And this brings me on to my last point, which is the concept of the public and private space for men and women. And segregation in Islam is an aspect of hijab which is often not emphasized. But you may remember earlier that I mentioned that one of the meanings of the word hijab is to form a screen or separation. Some may ask, how can a Muslim woman go out to work in the government, being a trader, an investor, participating in politics, seeking an education, remonstrating with rulers and accounting them, given the restrictions that Islam imposes on her in terms of not being in seclusion with men, not displaying her beauty, keeping her private life to women, her husband and unmarriageable kin? How does she frequent the marketplaces, offices of business, speak with men to undertake these activities in public life? And the question arises because of our current perceptions of how public and private spheres work. Feminists have long insisted that the division of labour in traditional human families constrains women's opportunities. They say the traditional female role is not natural but constructed in order to subjugate women economically, socially, politically. And in particular, they argue that historically, most philosophers viewed the home and family life as a separate realm that had to be protected from state interference. The most notable exception that they claim is John Stuart Mill. But anyway, feminists argue that we ended up with the private sphere, i.e. the home and the family, and the public sphere being dichotomized into two separate realms. At At the core of contemporary feminism is the idea that because women have predominantly occupied the private realm, and men have predominantly occupied the public realm, this has caused women to be socially disadvantaged in society. As a side note, one politician and governor of early Athenian democracy, Themistocles, famously once said, "I govern the Athenians, my wife governs me." And this has long been the perception of the private realm. As for the public realm, in the 1600s in Britain, it was a vogue culture to wear half masks in public spheres, to turn the wearer into an outsider, a stranger in a town that was otherwise his own. And at that time, people were more at ease with anonymity than ever before. And Christoph Hale writes in his book, The Metamorphosis of the Mask, this behaviour demonstrates that the privacy of strangers, or of people who now wanted to be treated as strangers, had become something to be respected. This points to a level of tolerance in urban English society which is indeed remarkable, and that was once the public realm here. This is a far cry from where we are now, where most people find it incomprehensible and almost suspicious if you don't use Facebook or Twitter, or if you are, why you're not fleshing out your account with personal details about your daily routine, why you don't reveal everything, why you don't offer transparency. And one writer, Slavoj Zizek, notes that now it is fashionable to complain that the private life is threatened or even disappearing in the face of the media's ability to expose one's most intimate personal details to the public. True, on condition that we turn things around, he goes on to explain. What is effectively disappearing here is the public life itself, the public sphere proper, in which one operates as a symbolic agent who cannot be reduced to a private individual, to a bundle of personal attributes, desires, traumas, and idiosyncrasies. In an Islamic society, Islam advocates a public sphere of a particular decorum shared between men and women, where professional, judicial, economic, educational, scientific, and technological activity takes place and which men and women both participate in. Islam then proposes two parallel social spheres, wherein men and women are free to be themselves. One is for the social gatherings of men and one is for the social gatherings of women. For example, men are to socialise only with men or to women that are precluded from marriage for them, such as their sisters, mothers, daughters, and so on. Men speak to each other differently when there are women around, as do women speak differently when men are around. And this segregation of the genders in social gatherings, the separate congregations, is a naturally occurring phenomenon that we can even see in school playgrounds, and something even picked up on by teachers who often paired up a boy and a girl to stop them talking in class or assemblies. We even see on public transport that men and women try to segregate themselves from strangers of the opposite sex unless there's no choice. Similarly, we find, looking at the traditional Muslim homes and quarters and their tents, for example, they had separate quarters for women and separate quarters for men. And the same is true of many houses in the Muslim world today. They tend to have separate living quarters for men and separate ones for women. Or these days, I've noticed, for example, when men and women want to have gatherings in their homes, women often plant the flag one day and the men know that they're evicted for the evening. Sometimes they all have to gather in one room, quietly watching a TV, waiting to be let out. And so it's an unspoken understanding that men and women tend to socialise differently and separately. And the private spheres in Islam are also protected from public or state interference. So unlike the CCTV state that we live in today, rife with phone tapping, email hacking, even insurance companies spying on customers in their own homes, under the Islamic system, the state is prohibited from spying on its citizens. Such an invasion of private space is punishable in Islam. A woman, on the other hand, that experiences any injustice in this private social sphere of hers, for example from her husband, can complain to the state directly about him being abusive or neglectful. A man in Islam, however, does not have the same recourse against his wife, as it considers it to be humiliating and degrading for a woman to be dragged into the public courts for redress against something done in the home. The man can be, however, because he has a duty in the eyes of the state to protect her and guard her from harm or neglect. So we can see that Islam strikes a balance with the private and public realms that ensures that men and women can operate freely in the public realm whilst also having their freedom in the private social realms. Now some may argue, why can't we mix freely with one another? Like, I'm an adult, I'm not a child, I don't need segregation or barriers to stop me from misbehaving or cheating on my partner. Well, it's also adults and not children that are known to do these things in society. They're also known to kill people and start wars. It's not the children that worry us, it's the adults. But let's just suppose that most people can control their own desires and impulses. Most girls would feel quite uncomfortable if they knew that their husband or boyfriend was going to be spending a night watching a movie with another girl, but just as friends. Or flip it round, how would a guy feel if his wife or girlfriend said, I'm just going to be spending a night with a guy friend watching a movie? Why would that make you uncomfortable if you're, all adults and they're just friends? And it's in this situation that most of us know of someone with whom something just happened. It just happened. That's what they say. And what happened was sexual tension, desire and impulses. And these are just observations of human nature. And Islam recognizes this aspect of human nature. And it simply provides a way to minimize the temptation. So it facilitates men and women to work together professionally and segregates their social gatherings. And this segregation is part of the hijab. Now, to end as I began, freedom of expression is based upon two myths. The first is that the person may act and speak as he likes, as long as no harm or offence is caused to another. And the second is that this freedom is a sign of progress and development. For Muslims, the idea of the hijab is not a choice or a freedom of expression. To defend the hijab by saying that it is our freedom of choice or expression, and nobody should interfere, puts the act of wearing the hijab on par with the act of dyeing one's hair pink. It assumes that Muslims make their decisions on pure preference without any guidance other than what is personal. It not only buys into the myth of the freedom of expression, but does not reflect that we wear the hijab because ultimately it's a command from God that we submit to by virtue of being Muslim. The choice that we make is to submit to Islam. The laws following that choice are mandatory. And I just want to emphasize, women that wear the veil are not oppressed. Women are not nymphomaniacs that have desires to strip off naked in public, so when we cover ourselves, we're not restricting ourselves. And the reason for the injunction is to guard against the exploitation of women's bodies and men's desires, and to enable men and women to go about their lives with the least sexual tension as possible. Whilst in a society where less is best, shrouding ourselves might make us stand out in a crowd. Still, less can be seen of our bodies, so more might be seen of our character. And it is ultimately to perpetuate the Islamic ideal of how men and women in a society should collaborate. The reality is that we cover first and foremost because it's a command of God. In the end, true self-worth and contentment doesn't come through submission to any aspect of creation, but rather by submission to the Creator himself and all that he commands. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank Sr Zara for that speech. Does anybody have any questions? We're just going to have a short question and answer session.
Yeah.
A question that's often asked regarding hijab is to do with specifically the headscarf and the covering of the hair. How would you say the covering of the hair relates to a woman being modest and protecting her assets, or whatever you call it?
Okay, well, the covering of the hair, some people say it's not specifically stated in the Quran. And we find the specific stipulation more explicitly in the hadith. So where the Prophet says that once a woman comes of age, nothing should be seen of her except her face and hands. So in Islam, the hair is considered part of the awrah. And I mean, I just quoted that example from the Cosmopolitan magazine, and it said the first thing that men notice about you apparently is the thickness of your hair. So I guess hair is attractive to guys, so it constitutes part of the beauty and awrah of a woman. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the speech. I actually loved it. There are some Muslims who say they're feminists, and they're like all out. You know, like I get really confused because doesn't Islam incorporate the values of feminists? Because Islam does liberate women. But what I'm confused is you have these certain like groups who they say they're Muslim but they're feminist.
Yeah.
I get really confused from that.
Well, I see this as not far as saying, you know, I'm a Muslim agnostic or I'm a Muslim atheist. It doesn't make any sense because Islam does not incorporate the values of feminism. If you look at the values of feminism, you probably struggle to pick out at least 3 of them. The only thing that most feminists can agree on is the name. they call for equality, but often this is just used as a guise for gender privilege. So, for example, you have the example of Harriet Harman and Patricia Hewitt that were equality ministers here in the UK. They both called themselves feminists, and they both got into trouble because they were advocating specific instances of women that they should be prioritised for a job, even where the other candidate was better qualified. So where you had a male with certain qualifications, a woman less qualified, they said that the woman should be given the job. And they called this equality. Now, these are the values which Islam does not incorporate. Islam, advocates meritocracy. As for the rights of men and women, Islam provides a comprehensive system, not just for women to the exclusion of men, not just for men to the exclusion of women, but both of them together. So Islam has no need for feminism. Feminism can't even explain itself. Islam does not incorporate feminism. Maybe feminists should look to Islam as an alternative, because at the moment, a lot of Muslim sisters, as you say, are perhaps, through understandable frustration of seeing that Islam is not fully being implemented. And so they look to foreign movements because they think this is going to help them. But actually it's not. It's like there's a saying that, if you have the water at home, why are you going somewhere else? Any others? Any other questions? Yeah. Hi.
Hi. First of all, thank you for your talk. And in the first bit, you talked about society where less is best and everything, referring to sort of fashions for skimpy clothes and pressures put on young women. And I think what I want to say, of course, you're not without allies in having anxieties about that. And obviously, you get schools that are quite fussy about school uniform, and women in professional life are expected to dress quite modestly. And of course, I'm a priest in the Christian church, and there's a great deal of anxiety in the churches about the pressures that women are put under. And I think also, talking about society, in a sense, I'd kind of question that, because I'd say, well, can you think of a father of a daughter anywhere who would not be concerned about the kind of pressures he might see his own daughter being under? So I'm just sort of slightly quibbling the thing you say, society this, but,
I know, of course, I agree with you completely. But the reality is, all these women that I've described, all these women that take in the surveys, they do have fathers and brothers that perhaps don't know what the solutions should be. They don't know how to deal with this. And I think, again, I would invite them to really look at the values, and not just the values, because as you say, Muslims are not without allies in advocating that there should be an alternative way. But look to Islam for the methods as well. And then you'll find that perhaps there's solutions that can be implemented.
Okay. So. Now the question, sorry about that. You talked about how women in Islam, the idea is the things that are focused on virtue, intelligence, doing God's will. And you talked about Islam also as a meritocracy. Mm-hmm. Now, in my church, we have a lot of discussions at the moment about the position of women in the religious hierarchy as being able to lead worship and have positions of leadership in our churches. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to ask you was what you, in the light of everything you've said about women in Islam, what you think about women leading public prayers and also women having roles in the religious hierarchy.
Okay, well, in Islam, we view power and authority in a very different way. So in Islam, neither men nor women are encouraged to pursue power, because power is not seen as a virtue, it's seen as a responsibility. And so this is why men have certain responsibilities, women have other responsibilities, and we're not supposed to strive for roles of leadership or authority. And this is why, for example, in where you have Islamic states, when we had Islamic states, the caliph was not selected because he put himself forward. He was literally dragged forward because others saw the merits in him. He didn't want to do it, and the fact that he did not want to do it is part of what made him the better candidate. Similarly, both men and women are allowed to be judges in Islam. So, for example, we have the wife of the Prophet, Aisha, who was not only memorized a great deal of Islamic legal sources, but also gave a lot of juristic verdicts. And so a woman is allowed to be a judge, she's allowed to take these roles, but it's not something that should be pursued. And so we have a narration of one man in our Abbasid times who went to account the ruler. So he went to the ruler, he thought this ruler was a tyrant, and he said, "You're a tyrant, you're doing this, that, and the other, stop." The tyrant got very angry. The tyrant was about to make a punishment for him. The man ran away. before the punishment could be issued. The punishment was that that man had to be a judge, and that no verdict that he gave was allowed to be overruled. So the idea is that being a judge or being in a position of power or authority is not a virtue in Islam, it's a responsibility, and one that most Muslims who know the power of accountability, know the value of not wanting to be judged for what they might accidentally lead others to do. This is something that Muslims don't actively strive for. So the concept of power in Islam and authority and leadership is very different to what you described. So this is why we have a very different take on it in Islam.
Right, so can women lead Friday prayers?
Essentially the idea is that the woman is not supposed to be in front of the men, and there's a reason for this. When you're leading the Friday prayer, you're standing in front of all the men, and when the time comes to prostrate, you have to bend down. And the idea is when you bend down, you're kind of exposed to all these men that are standing behind you. And this is why in the Friday prayers or any prayers congregation, the women are at the back and the women pray behind the men. This is not because they're lesser or because, you know, their prayer is worth less than the man's. This is actually to protect them from the gaze of men. It's a very simple social construct. And so, yeah, that is how we pray, that is how we rule, that is how we, you know, that is how we place these values in society. Any other questions? Yeah.
What would you define as social segregation?
Social segregation?
Yeah. What's your definition of it?
I mean, I think I touched on it in my lecture, that basically what you have is men and women socialise, you know, there's no limitation on what you socialise as long as what you're doing is nothing prohibited, you know, you're not socialising over, you know, alcohol or all these kind of things. But the idea is that men and women socialise separately. So men tend to socialise with men, and, you know, in their homes with, you know, their wives, sisters, families, whatever, that's obvious. And women also have a separate structure, a separate sphere for socialising. So the way to imagine it, I guess, is public sphere, men and women together, professional, all of that. And then you have two private spheres. And this is how it works. So that's the way that segregation works in Islam. Yeah.
Would you argue that by keeping that segregated, when maybe a young couple do mix, it's actually more, it kind of makes it more of a big deal? Like, my parents wouldn't mind me going around to watch a film at a guy's house or a friend that's a boy, because it happens all the time. I do it all the time, whether it's with you know, a group of us, or do you think that by keeping it separate, if that was to happen in one occasion, it actually kind of makes more of a big deal of it in that society where it's kept separate?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that we keep this segregation is exactly to preserve that sense of sensitivity, that men and women don't become desensitized to one another. So when men and women come of age, they want to get married. When they meet someone, it's much more special. But the way that Islam prescribes this is not that they meet in seclusion, is that they meet with other people around, they get to know each other, and so that it's in a safe environment, no one's feelings get hurt, no one's led down the wrong path, no one has a wrong expectation of what's going on. So what you described is exactly what Islam is trying to preserve. It's trying to preserve that sense of specialness. But the way it does it is with a different set of regulations around it. So. That's it? Yeah.
If a Muslim woman doesn't cover her head, would that be considered as a sin?
I think, well, I mean, the whole point of the Islamic system is that, you know, you cover in a certain way and that you dress in a certain way. And as I mentioned, just because you cover doesn't mean you're sinless. And for someone that finds themselves in today's society, which is very difficult, I mean, not everyone covers, so you don't have that necessary, you know, that idea that everyone's covering, so I have to cover too. So I think in the society that we live in today, it's a different journey that we have to go through to get there. And I think, as I said, you know, God is most merciful and most understanding, and just because you don't wear it doesn't mean you won't wear it in the future. And it's more important to have a sincerity, I guess, for the society that we live in now, where, you know, it's not something that the state kind of, you know, regulates or anything like that, but it's something that, you know, have that sincerity. I know a lot of sisters that say, you know, they read about it, so they know that it's a must and they know what the benefits are, but they find it really hard, you know, it's not easy. So a lot of them, you know, I heard a few sisters say, and this is one of the most sincere things I heard, was that if I didn't have to wear it, I probably wouldn't. And this is because it's a struggle, it's not easy, and this is something that I know a lot of Muslim sisters now, you know, they have a hard time getting to grips with it, and they think, oh, am I sinful, am I this or am I that? And I think just be patient and be sincere in your path towards it, if that's what you want to say. Yeah.
Just drawing off from the previous point, because of the current trends and the way things are, the sort of structure, you do have, even though some women would prefer it, I mean, but still they can't or they don't want to because they feel it's, I don't know what goes.
Prefer not to.
If they, I mean, even if they understand that it's good,
Mm-hmm.
they still, because of the social structure, they're not really into doing the hijab or everything.
Yeah.
So, if a man actually tries to explain to her what it is, they might sometimes get offended. What would you say is the best way for a man to encourage or explain it to her?
Well, I think your duty is just to explain it. You can't force someone, and even God said to the Prophet ﷺ, your duty is to convey the message. That's it. And so, if you've conveyed it clearly, that's all you can do. You can't force someone to do it, and that's if you force someone, then it might be they'll wear it for a few weeks, and then afterwards take it off and be very resentful. So, I think your duty is just to convey it clearly. That's all you have to worry about. Yeah.
Would you say that like makeup and things like that add to it as well? Because I mean, like some people wear excessive amounts of makeup in attempts to like get attention. So would you say that's part of it as well?
Yeah, but this is one of the struggles that I was saying that women go through. So you see some women that wear the hijab, but they also wear excessive amounts of makeup in order to draw the attraction to their face, which they think they've lost by covering up. And as I was mentioning, just because they're covered, they're not perfect. Everyone is struggling, and particularly in this society, it's very, very hard. But certainly the accentuation and the adding of aesthetic attraction to whatever can be seen, this is something that's discouraged. So it is part of it. But the reason that you might see it sometimes is because, they're struggling. So.
No more questions?
No? Okay.
Right, I get a point.
Okay.
Could you elaborate on why women find it hard, why they say they find it hard to wear the hijab? I mean, obviously, as guys, we don't fully understand what women go through. So, again, you mentioned it. So, could you elaborate as to kind of what kind of pressures women face, or why is it hard exactly?
Okay. Well, I mean, I think, for example, I touched on in my lecture the pressures that women have to conform to this ideal. So they see a lot of other women in society that are not wearing it. Muslim, non-Muslim, whatever. They see it predominantly. They see it everywhere, and then they see that men also pursue that. So you have the woman that's covered. She's just standing there waiting for her life to kind of carry on. But in the meantime, the guys are out pursuing. Muslim guys. They're out pursuing the women that are not covered, and so women start to feel, hey, why am I doing this? Why? What's it worth for me if the guys are going to go and pursue the women that are not covered? Why am I bothering? Of course the girl knows, and she persists because she's not doing it for him. She's not doing it for anyone. She's doing it for God. And so, I think one of the things you asked for, what the guys should really think about, I think is it's a battle not just for girls. It's not just hard for the women. It's hard for the men too. But as women are struggling with wearing the hijab, I would, ask brothers to struggle a bit harder also in, respecting that and valuing that. And, again, the topic was, kind of relating to Shakespeare. And if anyone's read The Merchant of Venice, the character of Bassanio, he has the choice of 3 chests. One is gold, and, this is, by the way, in order to potentially win marriage with this beautiful European woman. And there's this beautiful gold chest, a beautiful silver one, and a very plain-looking one. And the test is that, she sets the test that she's only going to marry the guy that picks the right chest. So all these princes come from all over the lands, from all different countries. They go for the gold, they go for the silver, because they think, outward beauty means, it's all going to be good inside. And then Bassanio comes and he's like, no, and he works through the process. And he goes for the plain-looking one, because he realises that outward beauty is not necessarily what reveals what's within. Oftentimes, the real beauty is concealed, and it's not just aesthetic beauty, but inner beauty too. So, it's something that I think brothers have to really work on as well as sisters. Yeah.
Some parents they force their daughters like at the age of 3 or 4, like really young, to wear the hijab, and then when they're growing up, they're like, why am I wearing it? I don't really want it. Then they put it off, and the parents get angry. I'm sure you get the story. What advice would you give to aspiring parents to introduce the hijab into their daughters' lives?
I would say through, obviously the first thing is when they're a child, they don't have to wear it. We know that, right? In order to introduce it without imposing it on them, I would say is really the social company that you keep. And so I would advise such parents to seek good social company where the girl sees the benefits of being covered, where she sees that other women are covered and what the fruits of this are. And so the children are very smart. They figure out, they figure things out for themselves. And I think a young girl that sees that is going to automatically probably say herself, why aren't I wearing this? I want to wear it too. And I've seen lots of girls, they go through it this way. And I think that's probably the better way. And, if not, when they grow up and they start to think about it for themselves, they might go through a different route to get to it. They might, study it for themselves and find it that way. But for parents' role, I think it's a matter of just keeping with good company and letting them see the benefits of it. Okay, last question. Go ahead.
We were just wondering why, I think it's only in one school or more, why women aren't allowed to initiate a divorce.
Why women aren't allowed to initiate divorce? I think this depends on the circumstances. Generally, a woman can initiate a divorce, so I'm not sure.
Does she not have to ask him to ask her to divorce?
I think it's different in different schools. So it might be more a fiqh question that maybe we can discuss later. But generally, men and women both have divorce rights. The ayah in the Quran says women have rights over you just as you have rights over them. The man, obviously, as a husband, he's basically a legal guardian, so it's a different it's a different process for him than it is for her, because he's responsible for her financially and her protection and all of that in the eyes of the state. And that's why the divorce procedures are different, but both men and women are entitled to seek divorce. I think it's just different methods in the different schools, but yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much.
That's all right.